how you can use the Dutch National Archives to research your family tree. So take it away.
Great. All right, thank you. So this presentation tonight is going to be slightly different than what we're doing the last few nights. Last few nights, maybe for those that weren't here, there's a lot of PowerPoints and a lot of me talking and you listening and then having maybe some questions after. I thought I'd mix it up a little bit this time, and so since we're talking about family history and using archives to find your family history and genealogy and such, well, it's one thing to go through the Dutch National Archives and look yourself, but I've done so much work there already with transcribing things that are relevant to Saba that I have a quite large collection. And what we can do is I can introduce you to some of it. Some of this is already on, if it is still here, the external hard drive for Saba. If not, it could certainly be replaced and of course updated. But well, yeah, I'll go through here some of the resources that I've collected and made over the years here to help find a genealogy. So some of the earliest records that are useful for this would actually be from the Catholic Church. So I went in, talked to the priest at the time, and then I photographed the entire marriage record book, and then the baptism book and latest baptisms and deaths. So this one can be quite useful, especially since it's much more recent. So this one records, got some also parts in Latin there. Some Latin. And yeah, there's some unrelated things here, like there's members of the, I'll go through that later, but yes, there's of course names here of Sabans, which can be entirely useful. Quite a few of them actually. This is probably very comprehensive at the time. Yeah, so already this is very useful. This is probably everyone living on Saba at the time. Yeah, so there's entire lists over there. And then this is probably more records. So the official part starts over here. I guess there was just a little bit of introduction. So yeah, we start as early as 1834. Yeah, so that's when the first Catholic fathers were coming to the island. Not necessarily as transient pastors, which kind of tended to be how it was in the past, but they wanted to come to Saba to start a church, start converting people to Catholicism and establishing themselves here. So of course, one of the first things they started doing was baptizing and then conducting marriages, Catholic marriages, sorry. And of course, then they start taking the logs, and so this can be extremely useful to finding your genealogy. So this goes all the way. And others are put in here, like marriage certificates. Like there's one from 1930 from Bermuda, actually. For John William Clark Every and Vera Johanna Simmons. Yeah. So yeah, I believe this was all the way to 1930 or 1940. And of course, there's probably another book there that goes from 1940 to more recent. So yeah, this is very useful. Apparently, the Anglican Church had something similar. I was talking to Will Johnson about it some time ago, and he said it appears that it was thrown out after some maybe over-vigorous cleaning of a basement there or something like that. So that's quite unfortunate, because that would have gone back quite a long ways. Okay, so. is to you start to look for letters that maybe a word that you recognize, not necessarily because of a letter you can't recognize, but because it couldn't be anything else except this word. And then you look at that letter, and then you look how that letter can change, and then that's one way to start to get to do that. Sometimes it can be really difficult. Like there was one, there's that one consul on St. Bart's and St. Thomas. He wrote chicken scratch. But the problem was everything he was saying was so important and informative, and I needed to figure it out because it was not just something you could just pass by. So you had to take the time to figure out what he was, trying to say, and going back and wishing, like, man, just think of the historians. Come on. Just a little bit. Yeah. So let's go back here and So this is a little bit more legible here. Yeah, and this one is, we're already in 1934. Yeah. It's interesting, I forget which one of these has. One of these two books has, when I was talking about marginalia 2 days ago, it has an account of leprosy on Saba, and elephantiasis, so and how that was going through, and then another account of smallpox, a ship with smallpox coming in and having to be quarantined offshore for a while. And it also even had another census, just kind of buried inside of just little quick numbers of how many people were living in that each village. So yes, this one is very useful. So we'll go a little further back in time here, and we will go to, so here's one. So this one is somewhat incomplete, but as part of the Saba National Park establishment, we had to, or I was contracted to go through all these property records and find any lands that could be within what was the Saba National Park and find the former owners and figure that out. So it was like a massive jigsaw puzzle. Because for those of you that know property records on Saba, you could have descriptions of, bordered by the rock, bordered by the cherry tree, and bordered with Mr. Johnson's property. So, nowadays the rock rolled away, the tree died, and Mr. Johnson died. So, that would be great. So here, again, very useful information. So we have the purchaser. We've also got to who they purchased it from, for how much, and date. So again, so it might not be a census, but it contains names. So this is a very useful means to look for your ancestors. So again, divided up into different areas of the sulfur mine and up in the mountain. That was what's from. Yeah. But this is quite recent, so a lot of these names would probably be recognizable to some of the older heads on the island. Okay. So this is probably something that you've seen before. I transcribed this around 2012, I believe. So in 1863, emancipation was declared, and everyone that was enslaved on the islands and in Suriname was set free. And then there was a list made of every single person, every single owner of enslaved people on the island. So I cleaned up the table and kind of made it a little bit more legible than how it was presented. So it has the village, it has the name of the person that was formerly enslaved, the former owner, the owner's sex, and maybe some notes I was taking over there, and their age and their trade, and religion actually. So it's very informative. There's also, a curious thing too. So the former owner had to sign off because everyone had to sign something because they were receiving this money from the Dutch government for every person that was emancipated. But requiring a signature means that that you were literate and you know how to write your name. So you can actually check out literacy rates here. So I used that to figure out, that there's high amounts of literacy in Windward side. It sort of tapered off when you went to the bottom and tapered off again when you went to Hell's Gate, for example. Many people who weren't literate had to sign with an X. So, of course,
Question. The slaves at that time, they didn't have last names?
When they were slaves, no. When they were set free, they had to adopt a last name. Yeah, so we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, and Ryan,
Yes.
I can't really see from here, but can I assume that the predominant gender of the owners was male?
Yeah.
Okay. And you included gender, so there's a few women among owners?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, usually there could be a bias towards the men also in part because they're de facto considered the head of a household. So even though, a man and a wife is considered, for property inheritance, kind of a single entity. When it came to recording things like this, the man would have been considered the owner, even though it was probably husband and wife that actually. Yeah.
I see a few times owner illiterate, so these were people who were property owners, people owners, who were illiterate.
Oh yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So this, of course, you're just seeing the first.
Why that quite common?
Oh, it was very common actually. I'm gonna do this here.
So he's illiterate. Yeah, James Hassel, captain, literate.
Here we go. So we can go down. We have actually even some that were in St. Eustatius, owned by people in Saba. Yeah, we even have records here, Palmetto Point. So back there, so that's Mary's Point. So enslaved people that were there, and then people living there at the time that were set free, right? So now we know people that are very interested in Mary's Point. Now we had Abram Simmons living there, William James Simmons Jr., Thomas Eggers, William Eggers. Yeah.
I see you have St. Bart's there.
Yes.
Yeah, Eliza.
Why? Okay.
Yeah,
Why would we have St. Bart's and St. Thomas and other islands?
Because
Seems to have been sent there to work.
Yeah, they were agents actually. So were probably captains on the islands that are sailing regionally, and when they're conducting business on different islands, instead of going with, having to go through like a, what do they call here, the middleman? But yeah, an agent, yeah, basically.
Broker?
Yeah, broker, yeah, that's it. So yeah, anytime you wanted to bring goods into an island, you had to go through a local broker. So having at least one of your own people residents or slave person resident on the island can help facilitate that. Makes things easier. But at the same time, you would think that, well, if you have the owner on one island and then they're an enslaved person on somewhere else, what's to stop them from running away? So it shows you maybe some complexity in the relationships here. There had to be trust for that to work. Otherwise, no one would have agents like that on different islands. They were probably, I can only surmise here, but compensated in some way. I'm not entirely sure. But in many cases, some of these people were, and I think one example, they were on St. Bart's for 22 years or something at the time of emancipation. Yeah.
Now on St. Thomas, emancipation was 1848, so there would be, before 1863, there would be agents who were slaves on St. Thomas.
Yeah.
But of course they couldn't escape because there's the water, the sea.
Yeah.
It's not easy just to go.
Yeah, well, if you notice here too, that so they were present on St. Thomas and on St. Bart's, which at
Yes.
the time was still Swedish. But if they're on a British island, they were really pushing for emancipation.
Yes.
So if they were there, the British authorities actually would have declared them free.
Ah.
So that's why you're not seeing this here. 'Cause
Okay.
those
They
captains or
became
whoever
free.
it is would not have had them on that island
Yeah.
because they would not be enslaved anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and then many from the bottom. And also here, again, bottom is St. Thomas. River side. Yeah, and then of course they have notes there. So, yeah, again, this is a very, very valuable resource for family history here. Some of these tables haven't opened in a very long time. It's 2016 was the last time I used this one. It is what I remember. Yeah. So Vito was asking this earlier. So this is me transcribing the transcription that Will had of surnames that were adopted by formerly enslaved people around the 1870s. So now we have these common surnames here. So many of them aren't here today, but at the same time, I do recognize a lot of these regionally. So like there's Lakes, there's Atwaters, Banks, Bells, Lydens, Lynches, Lindsay's, Levinstons. So one thing I was saying too on the first day was there was a law by Dutch colonial officials that if you were enslaved and then manumitted, that you could not take the surname of your former owner. However, on the SSS Islands here, that actually was not really enforced. So there are many occasions where formerly enslaved people took the surname of their previous owner. So like there's Sea Leagues, for example. So there used to be some free African descent Saban residents with the last name Seelig, and Seelig was the last owner of the Spring Bay Plantation. So they would have been formerly enslaved to that. And potentially even, I think I might know where they were living. I don't know how many have been down to Spring Bay Flat, but on the other side of that rock wall, there's actually a small house foundation and a cistern there, and there were 2 formerly enslaved people that were free living in that house at the time. So after the plantation stopped operations sometime around 1815, they were still living there, I think by the 1840s or 50s even. Yeah, so yeah, I'm sure again, many recognize here, we have Wilsons and Woodleys and Jacksons and yeah, going on that too. Sometimes instead of taking the last name of the former owner, it was changed somewhat. So Leverox, for example, like Moses Leverock was governor of Saba in 1863. So there's Levinstones. So Levinstone from Leverock. So there could be Horton was a common European descent Saban surname, and we have Sortons on the island. So just change the H for an S. Yeah. So again, so if you're looking for your family history, that's also something to keep in mind. So when you want to look at these documents and find, say, if you had an ancestor that you believe was enslaved, and you want to figure out who they were enslaved to, and then maybe use that to branch off and find your other relatives. Yeah, keep that in mind for maybe Hortons became Sortons, Leverocks, Levinstones, and so forth. Okay, we'll go a little further back in time. Oh yeah, this is something I forgot I'd done. This happens often, so I make these lists and then I forget about them and something else comes up. So when I was going through the research process of this, by the end of it I had all these documents collected everywhere, all these tables and so forth. And if you recall, I showed that statistic with the names of people, like the first names. You know how Henry John Thomas and all that were very common men's names, for example. But in order to figure that out, I actually had to go and find these names, make sure they were not the same person, and then use them here to make statistics. But at the same time, I'm suddenly collecting all these people, and all these names, and where they're from. So yeah, I have an entire table of it here, and so the date the name appears, the document where it appears here, where I could maybe find out where they're living. If they were enslaved or free, and I believe there's gender here. So again, this would be another resource for sure. So if you have names, you can index them in here, and then potentially locate your ancestors also. Yeah. So you can go in as far back to 1705. Yeah. But I don't think this is complete because I've obviously done more research since then, and there would be more names to add to this. So. Well, I suppose another nice thing we have is sometimes the same name keeps popping up again and again and again. And it popped up so much that you can actually maybe make a little life history here. So this one, this guy kept popping up here, Isaac Simmons, because he kept on going to court all the time. So here's one here, so William Simmons versus Isaac Simmons. Yeah, so I guess he shot a young beast. I guess that would be probably cattle. There's another one here where he had an argument with Lewis B. Granger. I might not have to read it here, but I can highlight it. There you go. Yeah, there's another one where where he assaulted a free African descent man, and which mashed them up, right? You get the language there. And that's the nice thing with these court records. Like I've seen that informal language, it really comes out here because they're writing verbatim. Because you wouldn't normally get that otherwise.
Well, they actually used that term back then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, mash you up. Yeah, that's an old term. Yeah. But yeah, then but yeah, I keep pulling them together, and then there's another incident where there's an enslaved person. His name was Scipio, and they they got in a very bad fight, apparently, and then it seems later, because he gets being pulled into court for being drunk all the time, there's this really long document. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So it turns out that Isaac Simmons was murdered. And then when you go further, it seems that his wife had hired Scipio to go and murder Isaac Simmons by strangling him with a handkerchief.
Oh my God.
Because apparently Isaac Simmons was chasing her around the island and probably a lot of domestic abuse and so forth. So she had enough of it, and it seems she took a hit out on him. And this didn't come out until about 20 years later, when
Wow.
this was overheard as Melly in the bottom, and then it had to come to court.
Nothing changed.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, sometimes you never know what you're gonna find, and then so sometimes it's just too interesting, and you save it. So yeah, the process of doing this, you can also not only find your ancestors, but maybe more colorful histories of them in the process here. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Have you ever tried to make a connection between some of these people and like people who are alive today? Or is there a possibility of seeing how that can happen?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's tracing your ancestry and seeing how far back you can go, and using references like these. It takes a lot of research and some time. I've tried to make it easier by pulling these together, and even easier, I suppose, 10 years ago. Now that I finally remembered I did it, compiling all those names together. Another thing, if I don't think I have an internet connection, but I was trying this earlier, just up before I came. So one thing you can also do with these, since you have like these large lists, if you're somewhat familiar with AI, say like ChatGPT 4.0, what you can do is if you have a very well organized table, and you tell ChatGPT, okay, I'm going to upload this Excel file to you, and all the columns, if you have initials there, this stands for this stands for that. And then you say, please, I don't know, please tell me some trends in what you see here, or please, I'm looking for this ancestor. Is this person in here, or maybe possibly related? And it will actually interpret it for you. So if you have very large amounts of data, if I had time, I could probably feed all of this in there. It would probably run out of memory, unless I paid more money, I suppose. A certain point to continue. And I've used it before for unrelated things like mining, for example. If I have very large data sets of like rock samples and so forth that I could never look through myself, it does it like that. And it could spit out research that would have taken me months and months and months to do. So it is something to keep in mind with this kind of stuff too. So there's other resources, for example, like the National Archives in Curacao. This I did in 2008, actually. When I was first starting to come here. Stopped over there. So this is a correspondence book between the governor of Curacao and Saba. And even though it's not, of course, talking maybe about families directly, they're always indirectly mentioned. So especially if there's something noteworthy or newsworthy that happens, that name's going to come up. So this might not be the first kind of resource you go to, but it does help. So I believe this is mostly in Dutch. But and again, you're looking at the cursive writing. So if you're not familiar with it, you're going to have to go start to look for words that are maybe a little bit more identifiable, and then use those to pull out letters, and then you figure out basically their writing style, and then proceed from there. Okay. So gone through those. Here's a small little bit of birth and death records. These pop up every now and then in the Dutch National Archives. So this is for, so it says table in the year, I think it's 1818, up on of Saba, born kids. So yeah, we have, so they're, the name of the mother, the sex, the children, the name of the person born, and their parents and so forth. So I have some of these, so those are of course useful. So a large project I took on after Irma, of course there's not a lot to do, so I figured, well, I might as well do something useful. So I had this really large collection of photographs of census records from the Dutch National Archives for Sint Eustatius and St. Maarten. So one of the nice things about Dutch administration, this might be the only time you ever hear me say this, is that it's thorough, and they did a very good job preserving their records. So it doesn't really exist outside of the Dutch colonial administrative world. So I was to go to the British National Archives to an island maybe similar to Saba, for example, and try and find remotely what I'm even showing you now. It might not even get 25% of it, if I was lucky. The Dutch National Archives are very comprehensive and very underused. So for example, when it came to the census records for St. Eustatius, their census records for maybe 70 years, easily, for the entire 18th century. So there's about 50 of them for St. Martin. So there's a lot you can do with that. So not only you can see, for example, like how the island was growing through time, or the number of enslaved people coming to the island, or even individual households. The number of enslaved people attached to that household is growing. You can infer, well, they must be getting more wealthy, for example. You can see trends like rises in the population relative to regional events like wars. So Statia really thrived off illegal trade, for example, and the population jumped up when there was like the War of Jenkins' Ear, for example. Yeah, that's a different story. War of Jenkins' Ear. The 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, and so on and so forth. So those are a lot of regional merchants kind of following the money and setting up shop. In any case, what can we do here? Where do we go? Okay, so I have every single year down here. It's not much for the early decades, but once we start to get into the 1720s and into the 30s, basically all the way to the 1780s, there's one for almost every single year. So I transcribed them all. We have the first name over here, the last name, any suffixes like junior, senior. They have a title, which might be like Esquire or Captain or Governor. If the person is a widow, I just made a note of that there. So, and that's actually an interesting bit here. So it has Jan Donkerzegers over here, but Jan is of course a man's name, but this is the widow of Jan Donkerzegers. So they're not actually showing her name. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then the number of people in the household. So, yeah. So then sometimes you would have like multiple families in a household, so that might show up for me sometimes too.
They
And
have
then
6 slaves.
Which one? Sorry.
They have 6 slaves.
This one? That's 16.
Lower down.
Yeah.
With the widows, the widow.
That's 6 daughters, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's 6 daughters, but yeah, well in this case here, there's 16 enslaved men to Jan Simons Donker, but he's also the first one there. That's I believe that was a governor at the time. Yeah. But yeah, there's
44.
yeah quite a few here.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, this person had 10 enslaved girls actually. Yeah. Yeah. And you see here too, there's language they use there too. So for there's a racial hierarchy in the colonial world. So generally, like in the Dutch world, for example, generally speaking, if you were black, that's assumed or to have like basically full African ancestry. Then they had a separate category for colored, and that's inferred that there's a mix of European and African ancestry. So they divided those for enslaved people over there because, yeah, even when we talk about like race and class, so the people that were considered black were, if you were free, you were low class, and then if you were colored, you were a class above that. And then if you were considered white, then you'd be the poorest of the white, but then you're not colored. So it was a very strict racial hierarchy, and that's reflected in documents like this here.
So were the coloreds also enslaved, or?
They could be, yeah.
Yeah.
But they would have more privilege based on their skin color.
They would.
Office.
Yeah, it's quite different, in interpreting it today as to what it was back then. For example, like for the Haitian Revolution, one of the things that happened is there's different factions of people. There were black enslaved people, and then there were what they call colored enslaved people, and then there were free people that were considered black, and then free people considered colored. But they divided themselves between those lines. So some of there's big factions of the colored free people that were siding with the French, because they felt that if the black free people were to gain power, that they would use it against them because of the class system there. Because the colored people always considered themselves higher class than those that were considered black. So even there within the African descent communities, they still had the divisions that was forced on them by colonial powers. How did I close that? Should we close that? Right, so we can keep going here. Since there's so many pages, gonna have to go like this. But there's some interesting divisions. As you get to the 1650s, it has a lot of other information in here, like sometimes they'll show the occupations, sometimes they'll show the religion, sometimes they'll even divide the census between, like, say, Jews and Christians, for example. You'll see that here too. Yeah, and then you also see free people of African descent are also on here too, and with a surname, of course, which then makes it easier to find your ancestry. And yeah, so I have this all the way up. I think there's a few I still have to do, but this goes all the way to 1780, I think. Well, it stops at 1770, yeah, so a little bit of work to do there. But, so that's there. There's also one for St. Martin. So, kind of the same setup here. So there's not as many, but yeah, it's the same idea. So, you know, the last name, the first name, suffixes, titles, the number of people in the household. So because people move between the islands, often if you had, if you're moderately wealthy, for example, you kind of follow where the money was and where the economic opportunities were, you can start to see people that appear in one island and from one census and then disappear and then reappear in another island on another census. All right. So here's a census from Saba from 1780. So this is also printed at the back here in the book. This is just yeah, a little bit more colorful, I suppose. But yeah, this one has, again, like all the surnames, people living on Saba as the head of the household, along with first names. So this here we can start to see the first free people of African descent. So, because if they're enslaved, they wouldn't appear on the census with their name, they would just be a statistic as someone's household. But because she's over here, she's free. So Flora was free, she was considered black, and then this is the amount of people in her household, so she had, well, herself, one boy and a girl, so 3 people in her household total.
And those are her children?
Yep.
In that column? Okay.
Yes, yeah. And who else do we have here? Minos over here, so he was a free black man just living by himself. There's Marku. So Peter Marku and a Sarah Marku. This you can take further because they're on Marku. Marku is a surname of a planter on Statia. I used to know the plantation, I can't think of it off the top of my head. But this was an early planter. I believe the Marku's one of the first planters on Statia, and I think they sold off by 1730 or 40. So these people were very likely, at least maybe their ancestors were enslaved to the Markus on Statia, and then made their way over here clearly to Saba. Yeah. So again, yeah, that's a resource. There's the early census that I've transcribed so far is for 1705, which is also in the book. I believe there's an earlier one for 1699. Okay, well, it does exist, and it's printed in the book, so it's not really an issue here. So another indirect way of figuring out ancestry and then and following surnames are things like debtor and creditor lists, which, well, don't exist, but I made them. So this is going through, basically looking at people who owe people money and people lending out money to other people here. So I've got the names of the creditors, so the person giving money and the person receiving the money, as for what it was, and the source of where it came from over here. Yeah. So
where was this recorded?
on Saba.
Who would have recorded it?
Anytime there's debt taken, it was registered through the island secretary. So then these are records of those. Yeah, so sometimes these also appear in auction records. They're just kind of mixed up between them. So I just kind of plucked them out and then made a record list of it over here. So we even have like Reverend Hugh Knox, so he was actually a Presbyterian minister when he appears there, and he was lending money to Rebecca Johnson. Household items that were auctioned off. So what I was saying before, in another presentation about a lack of money. So Saba had a very noticeable lack of money. So there's not a lot of coins or anything else to just go out and buy things with. So what people ended up doing a lot of the times is keeping tallies of small debts between people. So, it could be just buying a couple of eggs or something, and you don't have to go to the island secretary for that, but it was still kept between people, and those people will come forward with these claims. But the problem is, because there was such a lack of money, that a lot of these debts that were accrued here could not be paid until the person actually died. So then what would happen is then their estate, someone comes in as a value of their estate, not only their house, their land, any livestock, but also maybe the contents of the house. So they'll be going through and find silver spoons and plates, and these are given a value and then sold at public auction in order to get enough money to start paying off the creditors to the person or the estate. So again, these not only come with goods, but then also previous owner and then the purchaser. So again, we have sets of names over here that we can use to search for ancestry over here.
Question.
Yeah.
But that would only apply if the bloodline would completely wiped out. Like if you wiped out the entire, for example, Lancer family, and then only then would you, the secretary, whoever, come in, auction off my things. Because my things would eventually go to like my kids or my kids' kids, but that can only happen if I don't have no kids.
Yeah.
So if that's still happening when there's still Lancers, for example, alive, but one of the Lancers died, and you just come and auction off a table, chair, land, property, just to get the creditors.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. There's one case I saw where the head of the household, when he died, that he was so indebted that every single, like he had a wife and he had kids, he couldn't afford the debts. Every single thing he owned was sold. But then Thomas Dinsey, who at the time was the plantation owner in the bottom, and then also the governor, saw this, stepped in, and actually covered his debt. So to prevent him from being homeless and penniless and all that, especially with the wife and kids. So. And sort of as an aside here, you can also see some interesting bits here. So like the lime trees, so this is an area of land. There's other areas of land that are named that don't exist anymore, or maybe they just stopped being used. That was actually an idea that Teddy had, was been working with him off and on with that, is to collect all these old place names that appear in the documents, and then go around to the old heads on the island and then ask them, do you recognize this, or you recognize that, or what is the name of this, and to keep a tally of this and to make sure that information doesn't disappear. All right. So at this point, I can really just keep going forward here and trawling through, but it's I have a lot here. This will be available at the Heritage Center over here, and it would be a nice initiative if this was made into like a searchable database, where we can go through and look for a name, and then trawl through all these documents here and then show you where they are, and then use that as a basis for helping to find your ancestry. So are there any questions?
Yeah.
Did you find the example of having slaves in other islands with other islands around the area, or was it unique to Saba?
It probably happened, but I haven't seen it yet.
And you mentioned it would be nice if this could be,
It's just an idea for a project, really.
okay, so it's not something that's gonna happen, it's something that still.
Well, it could, yeah. Yeah.
I think it's
If I,
something
if,
should be.
if I may,
Yeah.
so as most of you may know, we have a website now, and the intention is to make all of this information accessible. And it's going to take some time because we need hands on deck, and so this is why we're bringing in the specialists and we're trying to make as many connections as possible. And we also want to do partnerships, for example, with NAM, because they have a lot of records for us in Curacao. And Saba is not in a position to repatriate anything to the island. So what's digitized is what we would like to make accessible. So for example, in the future, when you go to SabaHeritageCenter.org, you could go to partners and you could go directly to the part of the, for example, collection or Aruba website that has over 1,300 scans of Saba documents. You'll be able to do that for NAM. You'll be able to do that for the National Archives in Curacao. You'll be able to do that with different partners that we have in the region and internationally. So that's the long-term goal.
Yeah.
But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some funding and some hands on deck. But we have a vision and we're going to get there.
Nice.
Sooner than later.
That is the intention.
Yeah, time is pressing. Yeah, I'd like to do some further research
Mhm.
from my grandmother's side,
Mhm.
because I reach as far as her mother. There's no father listed, and it stops there. So maybe if I could get into the church records, probably I could get a little further.
Yeah, it would.
Find baptism,
If I do get time,
marriage,
I could try transcribing the church records, actually make them searchable and everything too. Because now they're just photos, but
The church records is a good lead though,
Mhm.
because
absolutely, yeah.
because
On
my
the
grandmother
Europeans-
used to go to the church at Cascade, so.
You said you got it until you.
On the European side, I reach a lot further,
Mhm.
because you find mother, father, children.
Mhm.
I have a great uncle. He had 6 slaves.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned this document there with all the last names, right?
Mhm.
Does that indicate the last name and the person who got the last name as well?
I don't know what that original document is. Will had it at the back of Tales from My Grandmother's Pipe, and he had typed it out from something, but I don't know where that original is. Maybe he has it. I'm not sure.
Because that is one of the discussions that we had with some experts, some archival experts in the Netherlands, where they indicated that on all the other 6 Dutch islands, 5 Dutch islands, or of the 6 Dutch islands, Saba was the only island that doesn't have that document readily available. And so I'm just
Oh,
wondering, from
okay.
your research, if you have ever
Mhm.
come into that, because that essentially might have solved your problem, because it would indicate then when the last name was given. And then when you go beyond that, they do some research, particularly in Aruba,
Mhm.
where they try to make this connection and use AI to facilitate that, to go deeper into the archival records. And
Mhm.
you can start seeing, like you said, you mentioned those patterns that elicit more information.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I'm not, as I think about it, I heard there was some kind of initiative a few years ago to have some archivists come and work with Will to sort and catalog his collection, but I don't know, maybe some of you know about that, but I didn't hear anything.
Didn't
since.
happen.
Okay. There we go.
But the
yeah.
idea is still very much there.
Okay, good.
What I noticed is from the slave that a lot of the names keep repeating themselves. They have Francis, and they go Francis again. So you have to try
Yep.
to figure out, where to place them.
Yeah, a lot of the names were used, especially with men. There's a narrower pool of names than there were for women, for example. Yeah. Well, thank you. And if you have any questions, even after now, you can send me an email and I can have a look through this. If you have any questions about an ancestor, and I can see what I can find for sure. Thanks.
So thank you everybody for coming. So this is the last of our 4 sessions we had scheduled for this week. So tomorrow is the end of the month. So thank you very much for celebrating Black History Month with Saba Archeological Center Foundation and the Heritage Center. Tomorrow we have the unveiling of our very first storyboard, which I'm very excited about, and that will be in Winmont side. So as per usual, See and Learn is taking the lead on this, so it will be on their social media and our social media as well. And all of this has been recorded and live streamed, so it will be available on our Facebook. If you don't have Facebook. It's also on our YouTube channel, Saba Heritage Center. So if you ever need to go back and look, see if you missed any information, it's all there, it's all recorded. The quality is quite good, if I might say so myself. I want to thank everybody that has helped the list. Is very long. I'm still compiling it. But you know, to the board, to Vito for assisting, the gentlemen I've had here, Chris and Ton. Ryan made a very long trek to get here. Aaron made a even longer trek to get here. You know, ICS has been, you know, Stephanie, I think I've called her 1,000 times and she answered all of my calls and answers and questions. So it's been wonderful. It's been a very good learning experience for us because I think it's the first time in a long time we've done something of this magnitude. And so it makes me very excited and gives me impetus for all of the other projects that we have coming up. And so March is Women's History Month. And we have a speaker coming in again of Surinamese descent. And she'll be here, so you can look forward to our social media. And she's going to talk specifically to women and enslavement and their experiences and how that links to us today and what we experience. So yeah, we have lots of exciting projects coming up. So I again putting the plug out there. Please follow us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, Saba Heritage Center. It doesn't get any easier than that. Saba Heritage Center. You know, keep checking back on the website because we are slowly updating as we go along. And we are going to do our best as much as possible to make all of this information as accessible. Please bear in mind, it's a staff of one. Here she is. You know, we have an oral historian coming on board. We have an education officer coming on board. And I will make those announcements as we get them. But things are just a little bit slow because I'm one person. But we have a vision and we're working towards it. So I believe by the end of 2025, we will have very many projects up and running and we will be in a good track. So thank you again to everybody. You've made this week very successful and looking forward to seeing you at the rest of our events for the year. Thank you.